Good evening. Again, my name is Chris Buckley, and I'm with the Public Outreach Team at OCTA. We appreciate you spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's focus is on the Coastal Rail Resiliency Study, or CRRS, and the draft alternative concepts that we've developed as part of that study. So before we get started, I wanted to highlight a few quick ground rules. This will help us have a very productive meeting. OCTA is committed to making sure that everyone has a fair opportunity to speak, be heard, and contribute to the process. To support that, we ask all participants to respect the format of the meeting, treat others with respect, address all comments to the panel, and maintain a conversational tone. This helps ensure that we hear a wide range of perspectives. Our goal is simple. We want to share information, we want to answer questions, and hear your feedback. So a few logistics before we get started here. The meeting is being recorded so we can accurately capture your input. A Spanish interpretation is available in the back. We'll take verbal questions after the presentation during the Q&A. And if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand and we will bring you a microphone. Comment cards are also available in the back if you prefer to write down your feedback. Before we continue, I want you to take a look at the handout. So if you haven't received them, there are a couple of handouts in the back. On the first page, you'll see this table, and that shows the draft solutions that we're considering. These are grouped into bluff side, beach side, and rail concepts, and where they might apply. Down the side are what we call typical sections. These are like slices of the corridor that show different conditions, right? So for example, rail between a bluff and a beach, or between homes and a trail. Each section represents a common setup along the 7-mile corridor. If you look at pages 2 and 3, they show you a map of the full corridor and where those sections occur. It's color-coded across the bottom. We have the maps up on both sides as well, so you're more than welcome to take snapshots, whatever you want to do. Afterward, we'll be around if you have additional questions. And the last page, last couple pages are a glossary. We know that engineering is, everyone speaks differently when it comes to that. Not everyone's speaking engineering, and this one helps explain terms like riprap, high draggers, or seawalls, things like that. And it gives real examples, local examples. Keep this handy during the presentation. And if anything raises a question, feel free to bring it up during the Q&A. Before we go any further, I want everybody to introduce themselves. On the right, Rebecca.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Soto. I'm Regional Rail Planner for OCTA. Welcome.
On my left, we've got George, Avi, and Russ. Go ahead.
I'm George Roscoe with HDR and one of the project managers.
I'm Avi Shaw with HDR. I'm the engineering lead.
Russ Boudreau with Coastal Frontiers Corporation. I'm a coastal engineer.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate that. All right, I'm going to hand it off to Rebecca, and she's going to start the presentation.
Okay. All right, can everybody hear me okay? No. All right, everybody, welcome. Okay, all right. Here we go. Hopefully I'm not shouting at everybody. So good evening, everybody. This is just a quick snapshot at our agenda today. First, we're just gonna go over today's meeting purpose and focus, briefly go over the history of this study, talk about why we're here, the draft alternative concepts that we'll be going over today, and then at the end of the presentation, we will hold a Q&A session, and you'll be welcome to ask questions, provide comments, provide your feedback, and we welcome that. So, okay, so starting with today's meeting purpose, this is part of our OCTA's Coastal Rail Resiliency Study. This is the study that looks at the 7-mile segment of railroad corridor that runs through South Orange County. And it's broken up by these typical sections that we'll talk about later on in more detail. And so this study aims to develop solutions to protect this 7-mile coastal rail segment in place for a period of about 10 to 30 years. And then these draft alternative concepts focus on that time frame. Okay, so just brief history of service impacts. I'm sure a lot of us are probably aware, but there have been various railroad closures over the course of operations. However, in the last 3 to 4 years, coastal erosion has become particularly challenging and has posed more issues that have impacted railroad operations. That includes both passenger and freight rail service. So you can see the timeline here. Within the last few years, there have been about 5 railroad closures, resulting in just under a year's worth of closures total if you add up all of that time. And so again, this study is looking at various concepts and strategies that we can implement at some point in time over the 10 to 30 year period to help protect those railroad operations in place and hopefully reduce the number of service impacts and closures. Okay, so we started this study back in 2023. Again, we were kind of looking at and assessing existing conditions, risks, challenges, and then potential solutions to protect the railroad in place. That this study has included listening sessions throughout 2024 to gain community and community-based organization feedback, as well as we've engaged stakeholders throughout this process as well. In December 2024, we held an expert panel that looked at all of these different solutions by industry experts. So bringing us to kind of the core of why we're here today, we developed these different, what we're referring to as draft alternative concepts. And so what we did was, as part of the study, we identified and assessed vulnerable locations throughout the 7-mile rail segment. And then we evaluated and prioritized these adaptation strategies and engineering solutions that we could potentially apply to these different sections along the railroad in order to maintain safe and reliable railroad operations throughout that corridor. And so by developing these concepts, our goal is to have a menu of options, so to speak, of these strategies to address coastal erosion issues as it relates to rail operations, and then ultimately develop a program of capital projects for implementation, and then continue to engage the community and stakeholders as we continue to work towards stabilizing the railroad. So these concepts have been broken down into 3 sort of categories here. We've got bluffside concepts, which addresses the landward challenges, and we have beachside concepts, and then we have rail concepts as well. Okay, so I know it's a little hard to see, but so here on this slide we have the different sort of strategies that fall under these 3 different categories. On the bluff side, we would see things like catchment walls, stabilization grading, pin pile walls, tiebacks, surface matting, drainage improvements, upgrading cutoff drains. Very engineering-based solutions. On the beach side, we would have things like riprap placement, engineered rock revetment, vertical seawalls, things of that nature. And then for the rail category, we would be looking at things such as elevating the tracks or looking at alternative materials to upgrade the critical railroad infrastructure and hopefully reduce life cycle costs. So that being said, I'm going to hand it off to George over here, who's going to go over the more technical part of how these different strategies would be applied through the different sections throughout this segment.
So in one of the handouts that Chris mentioned, you have a map, and we're going to be constantly referring back to that map because it's just helpful for us to know where we are at within the corridor. Our attempt here is to try and structure the different kind of infrastructure elements that you see along this 7-mile stretch. And we've broken it down into 7 different typical sections. There might be exceptions to these 7 in probably very small areas, but for the most part, one of these 7 typical sections will characterize any of the place that you'll see here on the right-of-way. So on this particular slide and the next slide, it's just a map showing the overall layout with the color coding of each one of these typical sections. And as we go on to each typical section, the bottom of the slide will also show this as well for reference, so you know what areas we are talking about. So I'll dive into the first typical section. So typical section number 1, over on the right-hand side, you'll see a graphic starting from the right, which you'll see the resemblance there of the ocean water, that blue. You have a nice, decently wide beach, followed by some minor riprap areas with the track and the railroad right-of-way, followed by Coast Highway and then the bluffs. This, for the most part, is all within the city of Dana Point side. You see the red there on the milepost markers on the bottom from milepost 200 to 207. So you'll see where that red line is. That's where this typical section is taking place. And what you'll see from here on out is that the infrastructure that you see there in that typical section, there's going to be some movement because sometimes you don't have that parking lot or any kind of a building between the railroad and the beach, or sometimes you have a very minimal beach width area. And so you'll see some of those changes, how they will occur. So when we looked at typical section number 1, on the next slide, you'll see that as you look at the menu of beachside, bluff side, and rail side draft alternative concepts, on the bluff side, from our study's perspective, there's really no action to be taken here. The bluff is well away from the railroad tracks. It's on the other side of Pacific Coast Highway. On the beach side, the beach is also at a significant distance away, and so any of the beachside concepts that we're looking at here are mainly to be implemented by others, since it's way outside of the railroad right-of-way on the beach sand supply side. And then on the rail side, the one concept that's applicable here is just looking at alternative materials for critical railroad infrastructure to reduce the life cycle costs. And what we mean by this is we're in a very marine environment, and so things on the railroad, especially the metallic elements of the railroad, experience a lot of corrosion. And so it tends to have a lot of wear and tear. And so we're recommending that in the short and midterm, that the railroad potentially looks at different kind of materials that will fare better in a marine environment. Moving on to typical section 2. So on this, the typical section slightly changes. You have the beach over to your right with some minor riprap. Now you see the stretch of residential homes there. Then it's a tiny little access road for those homes. Then it's the railroad track. Then it's Coast Highway, and then it's the bluffs. So a very similar approach to this as well in terms of risk to the railroad in the next 10 to 30 years, looking at the short and midterm. There is no action taken on the bluff side. The bluffs are farther away. Same thing on the beach side. Looking at implementation by others to deal with any maintenance of that sand supply. And then on the rail side, it comes down to, again, being in a marine coastal environment, highly corrosive to metals. Typical section 3, again, you have a beach starting on the right-hand side. Obviously, a lot of this varies seasonally. You have riprap, and then you have the tracks. And in this particular smaller section, which is right there at North Beach, there is no bluff. And so with that, you have certain actions here. On the bluff side, no action. However, on the beach side, we did look at a menu of options here that could be applicable to this segment. Anything from riprap placement to engineered rock revetment to potentially even a vertical seawall or a hybrid structural solution. And as well as looking at beach nourishment with shoreline protection structures and or sand retention as well combined with that. And then on the rail side, there is, again, similar to typical section 1 and 2, just looking at the railroad materials and making them better to withstand the marine environment. All right, typical section 4. So from here on out, you get to see a lot more action, so to speak. Starting in typical section 4, you'll see on the bottom, the green designates the areas where you will see this typical section. Now we are within the city of San Clemente, and you have a beach there on the right side with some sand, riprap in some areas, and then you have the track, the trail, the bluffs, and then you have homes on top of those bluffs. So in looking at the next 10 to 30 years, some of the potential solutions here are either catchment walls to be able to catch any kind of debris that is sliding, looking at potentially stabilization grading to support the tow, looking at tieback or soil nail walls, ground improvements, as well as hydroggers to reduce the hydraulic pressure that the water causes there in the bluffs. On the rail side, we're looking at potentially here even elevating the tracks through these typical sections. Also, the alternative materials that have been mentioned in the previous typical sections, but also looking at some ground improvements. We see a lot of water underneath the rail bed, and on the railroad, that causes a lot of what we call pumping action, and it really deteriorates the stability of the track bed. So we would be looking at improvements for that as well. And then still here with typical section 4 on the beach side, a slew of these menu options are applicable here as well, such as riprap placement, engineered rock revetment, vertical seawall, the hybrid solution of any one of those 3 aforementioned structures, and then looking at the beach nourishment side as well with shoreline protections as well as sand retention measures. Typical section number 5, down below you'll see that there's 2 longer segments in the blue next to milepost 204 to like 204.5, and then towards the tail end of milepost 206 through 207.4. Again, here you have the ocean with little to no beach in this particular typical section. You have existing riprap followed by the track, with the trail being there present in some of those areas in the blue, then the bluffs, and again, residential homes on top. So the type of alternatives that we would consider here, starting off with the bluff side, again, catchment walls, stabilization grading, doing tieback or soil nails, ground improvements, and then cutoff drains or hydroggers, again, to deal with either the source of water where it's coming from or to lower the hydraulic pressure within the slope. On the beach side, we have, again, a similar menu of options that could be applicable here. Riprap placement, engineered rock revetment, vertical seawalls, or a hybrid of these. And then as well as on the beach nourishment side, looking at shoreline protection structures and sand retention measures. And then from the rail side here, we're looking at just two of those three options that are on the menu, either elevating the track or looking at making the track infrastructure more resilient to the corrosive environment. Typical section 6, this is where just from milepost 204.5, roughly speaking, to milepost 205, there is a stretch here that you will see. You have the beach, then you have the ocean water, you have the beach, you have the trail, you have the track, and then you have bluffs. In this particular short stretch, there's really not as many options that we need to consider here. We're either looking at some kind of a catchment wall on the bluff side to deal with any potential erosion of the bluffs. On the beach side, the water is far enough from the tracks where we don't see that high of a risk. And so we would be just collaborating with other regional beach sand projects in this area. And then on the rail side, it just comes down again to the material of the track infrastructure. In our last typical section, number 7, this is where we have, again, the ocean, the beach, some riprap in some of these areas. You have the track, the trail, bluffs, and then home on top. When we look at the options here for typical section number 7, on the bluff side, the bluffs tend to be far enough away to where there is no action at this time that we think needs to be taken. However, on the beach side, we would look at some engineered rock revetment, beach nourishment with shoreline protection structures, and also looking at increasing the beach sand supply, which is something that we would be collaborating with others to implement. And then on the rail side, it just comes down to the materials, again, just to protect it from the corrosive environment. Chris?
Appreciate that. Thank you, George. Now we're going to open the floor to your questions and comments. We want this to be a productive exchange, so please keep your questions and comments to 2 minutes and direct them to the panel. The way we're going to handle this is raise your hand. We'll bring the microphone over and give you a chance to make your comment or ask your question.
Okay, testing. Okay, first question. Go ahead, sir, stand up. If you wouldn't mind saying your name.
Mark Swisshelm.
Okay.
I do live in the TS5 area around 204 checkpoint. And as with anything, timing is everything. And I do appreciate the fact that when you replace the riprap, that you did do as you promised. It was kept in the footprint that it originally had, although I have to say that a lot of the rocks are already rolling off the stack and onto the beach. So to me, the placement of the sand to protect both the beach and the riprap is critical. So I would think if we could get some idea of when that possibly may begin.
Thanks. So that's actually part of the emergency projects, not part of the coastal rail resiliency study. That's the focus of this meeting. This group up here can focus, on the study, but what we can do is take your question afterward and give you a little bit more information. I will say that our board of directors at OCTA recently received a presentation, was yesterday, and you can get a little bit more detail about sand there. They give an update on the emergency projects right at the top of the meeting, so we're happy to share that with everybody here.
Next question. Go ahead, Sam.
Hi, Tara. Quick question. What's the shelf life on the railroad if nothing is done?
I think that's a question for you, George.
It's a very hard question to answer, and here's why. If nothing is done, I'm sure you probably have a lot of caveats to that. Railroads, the railroad here in particular has been around for over 100 years, and there's always something being done on it to maintain it to a level of repair, and we call that state of good repair in order for it to be operational and meet FRA track and safety standards. So I would need a little bit more definition on the question. I'm not trying to dodge it either, just because there's things that you do on the railroad that you maintain on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, or on a yearly basis, or some even longer than that. So I'm not sure if the question is like, if you wouldn't do anything to the track, protection in the areas where there is, and if the waves come in and start to erode that, like, help me understand the question just so I know from what angle to attack it.
Yeah, it would be that. Just if everything is as current state, you're not adding any of the options, how long do we have?
Okay, so I'll answer it this way. You could be one storm away. So for example, in September of 2021, when we had the emergency event at the Cypress Shores location, that shifted the railroad tracks almost 3 feet towards the ocean. And so that segment there was inoperable. So you could have just one of those events, and that's it. If you don't do anything to maintain that one section, then you can't operate through this segment of track.
Hi, Bill Morris, resident of San Clemente. One of your beachside alternatives, alternative number 6, talks about sand retention measures. Do you have any definition of sand retention measures?
Yeah, Georgia. Russ, yeah, this would be a question for you.
Yeah, a very good question. So when we're talking about sand retention, they usually accompany a beach nourishment project. But a sand retention structure could be like a groin or a breakwater, something that actually helps hold the beach sand on longer. Basically enhances your investment in the beach by retaining the sand longer. And we learn a lot about sand retention by natural structures, like there are certain headlands. We notice on beaches where there are headlands that sand tends to collect. And so maybe we could emulate a structure like that artificially to retain sand. But generally what they are just structures to slow the loss of sand, and then it's just a trade-off of the economic trade-off of the cost of the retention structure and any potential impacts. But that's part of the analysis consideration.
Hi, I've been studying this for a long time, and I'm really confused. I was following along with what the typical sections were until you got down to the pier, and then they're repeating, and it's really hard for me to figure out from the pier south exactly what alternatives you're proposing for all of those beaches. Could you go back and just say, okay, so around the pier bowl, there's that green color, and yellow color, and these are the options. And down around the last bit, around 207.0, I can't even tell what color that is. I'm sorry.
I have the same question.
And so could you just go over a little more slowly and with from the pier south, because I was following and notating and then you stopped. Could you please?
You get this, George? Yeah. Thank you.
If you could explain all the sections, where they start and where they end, because I agree with Susie, I am completely confused.
Well, you have a couple of tools to work with, right? You've got the at the bottom of the map, you have color coding and you have the milepost markers.
I can't tell what the colors are.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, so let me walk you through that.
And it would take me a couple of hours to. sit there
Okay,
and look
we're
at it.
gonna let George respond. Thank you.
Right, if you just start at Coast
Sir,
Highway,
sir, we're gonna-
Coast Highway, go all the way through, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna let George respond.
Okay, so just to clarify, when you say start at Coast Highway, do you mean just start at milepost 200 all the way from the beginning?
Yeah, and tell us what section we're in, where it starts and where it ends.
Okay, all right. All right, so if we go all the way up first page of the map handout that everybody has. All right, so we'll start off where you see the Coast Highway 1 marker, and there is the railroad line in black, basically. At milepost 200.1, it starts turning to red. So from there, that red line represents typical section 1. And if you look all the way down below, you'll see typical section 1 with a red bar at the bottom of the page. So that's your legend. That continues from milepost 200.1 all the way to just past Capistrano Beach Park, where it'll turn now into orange. There, it turns orange and it continues. This is typical section 2. So again, in the legend below, you'll see typical section 2 with an orange bar. That comes all the way down to right around where Camino Capistrano Road. You'll see a little arrow on the bottom half of the map. It's right after the Dana Point San Clemente city line. So you'll see that orange switches back again to red. So again to a typical section 1 type. And then it'll switch shortly right before you get to milepost 203 to orange again, typical section 2. Once you get at the San Clemente Metrolink station, you switch to typical section 3. There is a more of a magenta kind of color. I'm an engineer. I'm trying to describe these colors.
Doing a fantastic job.
All right. That's a very small segment for typical section 3, and then it turns to green, again, a very small segment, typical section 4, and right before you hit milepost 204, you switch to a blue, which is typical section 5.
Then you're going to go to the next map.
Next map. This is where you have that big curve, the Mariposa area, and you pass Linda Lane, and right after that, it changes to typical section 6, which is like a dark purple. Right after milepost 205, there is a pedestrian overpass, and it switches again to green, meaning typical section 4. A very small stretch, and then it switches to yellow, typical section 7. And then after T Street Beach, it switches. There's some back and forth here, just because of how the bluffs are coming closer and further, and what's going on with that. So you'll see this switching off between typical section 4 and 7 all the way through to basically close to Cypress Shore. Once you hit that area in Cypress Shore, it's typical section 5 all the way down to county line.
Great, thank you, George. We're gonna move on.
Was that helpful, though? Just want to make sure.
Yeah, Susie,
Howdy. George Gregory, San Clemente. I think you really should give the rail back. I don't think you're competent of controlling a rail. I think you failed us for mass transit. And I think the people who gave you this hot bag of hooey are better railmen than you folks. So that's a consideration. You shouldn't have taken it to begin with. You knew it was going to be expensive. You knew it was going to keep costing money. And you knew you didn't have the infrastructure or the ability to handle this. My other comment is, I really think if we're going to harden our beaches and fortify them, we should build a harbor. Take the spoils from the harbor and put them on the beach. Those lasted 40 years at Cobble Beach. But we need really new thinking. You're fighting a losing battle against the mighty Pacific, and give the rail back. I don't think you're able to do this job. Thank you.
Okay. Susie, did you have a follow-up question? Are we good right now? Move on? Okay.
And then, so on State Beach, you go back and forth between the yellow and the green. Could you say in words, like what's the difference between, what's the main difference that caused you to differentiate those two and the options for those two? And then what's different between that and the one down at Cypress Shores, which is 5? So it's 4, what's the difference between 4 and 7 and the options that you chose for those and the difference between number 5?
I think Avi's going to take this one for us, yeah?
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with number 4. So the key characteristic here on typical section 4 is starting from the right. You have there is a sizable beach there. There's some riprap in certain areas, and then the trail is on the inland side, and then you have the bluff there. So here we've noticed that on the bluff side, there are some instabilities on the bluff. So you have the concepts for the catchment wall, stabilization grading, tiebacks or soil nails or pin pile walls, or ground improvement for bluff stabilization and hydro augers. There's a lot of groundwater in those bluffs that's causing instability. And on the rail, there's opportunities to elevate the tracks there. There aren't as many grade crossings or pedestrian crossings through that segment, and so there's an opportunity to raise the track profile. And as George mentioned, there's also a lot of groundwater that's penetrated into the track bed, causing that pumping situation in that area. So we're looking at ground improvements to kind of de-water the track bed for section 4. Moving on to, you want to meet this?
The beach side alternatives.
Just the beach side, okay. So the beach side, yeah, so we're looking at riprap placement, engineered rock revetment, vertical seawall, or some hybrid of that, and then beach nourishment with either a shoreline protection structure or sand retention measures, or collaborating with others on beach sand projects. And then to compare that to typical section 7. So 7, we have some beach in areas and riprap and kind of natural vegetation in other areas. Then you have the railroad, the trail, and the bluff with some residential on top. So here the bluffs are, we don't, the geological makeup of those bluffs are a little bit different. We don't see the same sort of groundwater issues in that area. On the beach side, we're looking at engineered rock revetment and then beach nourishment with either shoreline protection or increasing kind of beach sand supply by collaborating with others through this area.
Thank you, Avi. Next question. Okay. Nancy, do you want to get the lady in the back? And then we'll come back up here.
Hi, sorry, I'm coughing back here. My name is Sarah Spinuzzi. I'm a resident of San Clemente. I'm also the legal director for Orange County Coastkeeper. I guess my basic question is this the end of your presentation for today?
we've given the presentation for today.
Okay.
What are you thinking of?
Yeah, I guess my question is, it says resiliency study, and I feel like this is just a list of engineering options, and you haven't discussed costs or if you're planning on implementing them, or if we do implement them, how long it will protect the rail line. So, I mean, are you planning on presenting more at a future date?
Yes, absolutely. So this is just one point in the process. I'm not sure if you have this. I'll be sharing the slide with this in just a little bit after we're finished with the Q&A session. But we're right now drafting these concepts, right? So we're drafting the alternative concepts. We're going to take the information that's provided here and discussion from other agencies, partners, et cetera. We'll refine those concepts, and they'll be coming back to the public toward the end of the year, beginning of next year, with the refined concepts where you'll ultimately get a little bit more detail on that, if I'm not mistaken. So we're coming back one more time with the refinement of the concepts, and then after that, we will be drafting the feasibility study report, and that will also be there will also be an opportunity for the public to review that and comment on that. And then we have a final report toward the end of 2026 is what we're anticipating.
Great, thank you, Chris. Other questions? Two here, okay.
Gary Walsh, I'm with Save Our Beaches SC, and this is more of a comment than it is a question. And for the last 130 years, sand has been your best armoring to protect the tracks. There's no doubt about that. And I think if you'll notice, if you've gone down, and we have photography to demonstrate this, 250,000 cubic yards of sand were placed out at the pier over the winter, and it migrated down. And now that beach, it's migrated down, and it's increased the beach down at that last end, which we'll call Area 4, which we know it from, down around the state beach. And it's obvious to see because the sand was a different color. And so we're always puzzled, and I know I speak on not on behalf of our group, but on behalf of the citizens of San Clemente, that we want to see more and more sand put down and increase the size of that beach. I think you'll find you'll solve a lot of the problems that you are faced with the unstabilization of the tracks and such, with just a larger beach like you have been for the past 130 years. I did note that on every beachside possibility, riprap was number one. That was the first thing that was on every single one of those.
They're not in any particular order.
Oh, I know, yeah. But I'm just telling you, it was on the first part on every one of them.
I think, we definitely understand the value of sand nourishment. It's a part of all of the alternatives. But I think it depends on site conditions. Sand alone, we don't think that'll provide a long enough term protection. I think there's a lot there to discuss and understand. That's part of our analysis as well over the next several months as we refine these alternative concepts.
Thanks, Chris. Next question?
Hi, I'm Allie. You mentioned long-term solutions, and we've been talking, I feel like, a lot about short-term solutions, such as riprap and short armoring, but those just aren't going to be good enough in the future. So have you discussed long-term solutions, such as relocation of the railroad, and how far are you into that process of discussion?
I'll have Rebecca take that one.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yep, so there are plans to do a longer-term study that will look at not just relocation, but longer-term solutions as it relates to protecting the railroad in place. And of course, relocation will likely be one of those topics that it looks at. But that is supposed to be a state-led study, and that has not begun yet. And at this time, we don't have a timeline on that. But ultimately, that will the state will take that longer-term study on.
Hi, Jay Sohi, San Clemente. I noticed on your list you don't have any item regarding the beach where you can take into consideration sand as well as some form of breakwater to prevent the waves from taking away the sand. Recently, City of San Clemente hired a consultant, and they have published a report. And in that report, they have discussed that option. Have you had a chance to look at that study?
Yeah, Russ, I'll hand that to you.
Yeah, that's a good question, and we are familiar with that study and the work that's being done. But also, I would like to draw your attention that this study also is considering beach nourishment with sand retention structure. So when you talk about a breakwater, that's what we'd refer to as a sand retention structure. You put a breakwater offshore, it'll basically block the wave energy to the extent that sand will build up behind it. And so that's the sand retention structure, so that's one of the alternatives that we will be considering.
Well, when I looked at your list, it said shoreline protection structure 1 through 4 above, and 1 through 4 is basically riprap, rock revetment, vertical seawall, and hybrid structural solution. I did not see any breakwater in there, that's why I brought it up.
Maybe if I understand the specific area, because I know that beach nourishment with sand retention is one of the alternatives we're looking at. Maybe in the particular area you're looking at wasn't identified as potential need or other concerns related to the efficacy of sand retention.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
I just want to clarify, if you look at the draft alternative concepts again, that's the matrix you have with the check marks. It should note that, again, these are in no order of preference, but on number 6 is beach nourishment with sand retention measures and shoreline protection structure. Sure.
Yes, my name's Amanda Quintanilla. I'm a San Clemente resident of over 50 years, and this is more a comment than a question. Thank you so much for coming today and discussing this. I've read the initial assessment technical memorandum that was put out by the OCTA in 2023, and it does include sand nourishment. And as to answer Jay's question, it's on number 5 where it says beach nourishment with shoreline protection structure 1 through 4. So it does include that under emergent breakwaters or breakwaters. Also, it was at the Senate Subcommittee on Low Sand Rail Resiliency study that some of these proposals were discussed at the Senate level, and with Senator Blakespear, Senator Janet Wynn, and Metrolink CEO, and OCTA CEO, Mr. Darrell Johnson, and they all agreed that any type of revetment or facade would include sand nourishment. So that was, and it's still available at the Senate webpage, and so you can listen to that. But it does mention that in conjunction with with a facade or revetment, that would include sand nourishment, and they are working with that.
Okay, next question, Nancy. Do you want to grab one in the back?
Stacy, before we, I just want to make sure that we know we've got a few folks up here who've been patiently waiting. So,
hi, I'm John Robbins with Bring Back Our Beaches, and I'm wondering if we can get a little bit more information on the watershed modification. I think it was section 5 that had that as a alternative solution.
I think we'll hand that off to Russ. Take a look.
The watershed modifications, that's part of a broad menu, and that's probably something that's more appropriate to look at on a regional basis. But when we're talking about watershed, I think the focus is on right now. The watershed historically has delivered sand and sediment to the beaches, but as a result of creating flood control channels, debris basins and things like that, some of that sediment, which used to arrive to the beaches naturally and naturally nourished beaches, now it is held in retention basins and things like that. So the purpose of that alternative would be to do some modifications where perhaps that sediment could be freed or otherwise adjusted, where that sediment could continue down and be delivered either naturally or maybe even artificially down to the coast to actually ultimately get that sediment to the beach instead of being it stuck upland, which a lot of the times has been done for flood control and things such as that.
Thank you, Russell. Next question. Have you been waiting, sir?
Yes.
Thank you. Hey, my name is Zane Wu, resident of the city of San Clemente. I'm also a city council member. So I have two questions. Does the proposed sand nourishment include a periodic replacement to maintain certain beach width? Or is it just a one placement until the sand is gone before we place more sand? The second question is, if the long-term solution is to relocate, what is the end game of this project, this 30-year solution? At the end of the 30 year, are we going to remove the track and turn it back into sand beach, or are we going to leave them as is?
I think I can take the first one. Okay, go ahead. George is going to take the first one, and then Rebecca will take the second one.
So on the first one, our approach right now for all of this menu of options that we're looking at is to be able to, and I'm going to try to clarify your question because I want to make sure I'm answering it correctly here. You're asking for the in perpetuity replenishment of that sand, right?
At least for 30 years.
Okay, at least for 30 years. Yeah. So once we get to the refinement and then in the draft feasibility study, you will see conversations about that. Because some of the purpose of these options are to get us to that 30 years. What happens after that? I don't know if we're going to be here. Most of us are going to be here. But the long-term study is really going to have to deal with that. So that's the focus of this study is for the 30 years. And I think you're going to answer the long-term study.
So kind of along that vein, what happens at 30 years, ultimately that long-term study aims to answer. We can't tell you what would happen. The goal of this study and the time frame of the 10 to 30 years is to take a look at the reasonable measures and strategies that we can implement to keep the railroad in place and protect operations to get us to that point, to get us to the 30-year mark. And then from there, that is when the longer term solutions would kick in, so to speak. Will that be relocation? Will that be just complete removal? We can't say. We would have to look to that longer term study, which hasn't begun yet, to answer that question. But the purpose of this study is to get us to that point.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay,
We have a question over here.
back here, okay. And then we'll make our way this way.
I'd like the two folks in the front here next, after you, sir.
Oh, okay.
Just one more.
Hi, I'm Mike Kay. I live in Cottons by 207 on your map. I go all the time. I surf fish. Been surfing in here since the late 70s. There's a phenomena in my area that I'm concerned. I've never seen it addressed, and I want to bring it to your attention and ask you about it, and ask you if you have a plan for it. Specifically, where the rock revetment meets breaking water and sand. So low tide, there's exposed sand. High tide, water's up against it. And not many areas have that. But where there's sand constantly churning, the sand is acting as sandpaper, and shockingly quick is wearing down the bottom boulders of the revetment, both the old revetment at approximately 207.5, and where emergency riprap was put on twice now at approximately mile 207. In these specific locations where intertidal play, sand play, and wave action is there, are you aware of how quickly the base boulders are shrinking? Very quickly, weeks, months. And when a big wave comes now, the rock face is unstable And hundreds of boulders at 207.4, hundreds of boulders have now failed and fallen into the sea. Are you guys aware of that? And have you prepared a plan of action for those specific failure points? And will you be taking those hundreds of boulders back out that are outside the 50-foot allowed area? Because they are a hazard for surfers at Cottons, where I go out. It's a serious situation. Do you guys have a plan for that? And are you aware of that? Thanks.
George, I think that's for you, yeah? And I think we're talking about typical Section 5, that area.
Yeah, so from typical Section 5, as you can see, we are including sand as an alternative, both beach nourishment with shoreline protection and with sand retention measures as well. So we're aware of that, what that typical section looks like, and how we would ultimately want it to look like to provide the adequate protection for the railroad. In terms of the action that you described that's happening out there right now and what could be done about it, I think that that's probably more adequate for the railroad operator. We're not covering that in this study, but we are trying to take into account for what the ultimate solution could be.
Great, thank you, George. Ma'am in the yellow?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm Susan Ambrose. I've sat on the city's Coastal Advisory Committee for about 14 years now. And so yes, it doesn't look like I'm that old, but I am. But what I'm looking for is agreement with Mike Kay here, because I go down to 204 and 206, and when you put the last load of riprap down, people were saying, they're measuring, they're taking this off, they're putting it in different areas. What I see though, over the years, the run of the years, once you've put the riprap rocks, the sand, the ocean comes in and grabs that sand, and you can actually visually, if somebody took a movie of this, see that you might have had a riprap rock that was just a nice big oval, right? And it's just sitting there on their oval. Well, within 6 months, it's got about 2 feet down in the sand, because the ocean, the power of the water and the ocean is taking that sand back. And I see that at our El Portal, for example. The water comes up, and even I just saw, just two weeks ago, I saw some surfers coming in, and they nearly crashed their heads on those rocks. So keep a thought about that.
Appreciate that comment, and we'll capture that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next question.
Stacey.
You're right. Got it. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for all your knowledge and effort. And I live in San Clemente, and I know you're concentrating on the tracks, but what about the fact at the bottom of Camino Capistrano, that railroad overpass was built in 1928. And we can't have any access under there like we used to have because, I guess, of the age of the track or the bridge. So I don't know if there's a plan about improving that or changing it at all. And also, I remember I read that Ventura County put in 6 berms to decrease wave damage, and the Coastal Commission made them take them out 6 months later due to habitat disturbance.
So let me take the first part. I think you're talking about the pedestrian overcrossing.
No.
No, what overcrossing you're talking about?
Over Cochi Beach? 202 or 203?
It's the train bridge.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
And I'm sorry, what's your question about that then?
Well, it's old, and you're trying to protect the tracks from 1928. What if something happens to it? And secondly, we used to be able to go under there, and we can't anymore. They told us for years that they were going to fix it. Nothing ever happened.
Gotcha. So I think we're going to take that as a question that we'll have to get back to you on. It's not really part of this study per se, but we'll do that. Thank you. And then the second part was your comment about Ventura County and some berms that they created, and then the Coastal Commission made them remove those berms. I'm not sure about the details of that, but know that we're working with the Coastal Commission closely and other agencies as part of our sort of efforts. You know, they're apprised of everything.
Good evening. My name's Nina Babiarz. I came up from the other side of San Diego, but I'm not unfamiliar with Orange County. I moved out here in '84 and lived in Laguna and Dana Point for many years. I have comments and questions that are all related to the title of the study, Resilience, and focused on the environmental. I'm also a founding member of Public Watchdogs, and I've been involved in the situation at San Onofre for about 15 years now, since we had a radiation leak that shut the plant down. So I never hesitate to remind everybody that we've got 3.6 million pounds of radioactive nuclear waste that's going to eventually, hopefully, be moved out of that situation. And all of the deconstruction that's going on at San Onofre right now is all being moved out by rail. And even though it's low irradiated buildings and demolition, I came up because the study, ceases at the end of the county line. So one of my first comments is, and question, is regarding accelerated sea level rise. Because I don't know if, I think most of the people in this room are aware that Old Man Beach is gone. I mean, it's gone. The road to the surfing is gone. And I'm concerned about accelerated sea level rise, number one, because, we have a beach that's already gone. And second comment is with regard to seismic. I'm seeing tieback and soil nails, but nobody needs permission from Mother Nature to have an earthquake. We have the earthquake day every year, any second of any day. So I'm just curious as to the seismic situation that we have here, and how, if the tieback and the soil nails are strong enough to mitigate that. My third is Section 7, specifically, I believe you had bluff side, no action. So my question there is there any preventative method that could be addressed in Section 7 on the bluff side? And then elevating the tracks, can you talk about how you would do that?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of questions in there. Appreciate your comments about San Onofre and sea level rise. George, you want to take the two questions?
Yeah, so we'll start off with Russ. Russ, he'll address the coastal side, and then I'll address the retaining wall side.
Yeah, and I appreciate your comment on the resilience. And so as we look into the future, accelerating sea level rise is a real concern, and we're paying close attention to the current science on that. As a reminder, this study is kind of like a 10 to 30 year time frame. So we're looking out to maybe 2050, 2060 or something like that. That's the time frame. So accelerating sea level rise, it's not a small amount, but we're looking at maybe a foot to a foot and a half, which actually can make a big difference. But alternatives beyond that, then we're talking about those scenarios where we're looking at a lot larger sea level rise. But we are definitely taking into account accelerating sea level rise using the current planning standards by the state and the federal government, in this study and future studies as well.
Real quick, so I'll address the retaining wall, and then Avi will address the track raising. So from a retaining wall design, we will be taking in consideration seismic load as well. Similarly to what has been done at the Cypress Shore area, where we do have these tieback walls installed. Those are all taken into account: seismic, global stability, and several other factors as well.
For the track rising, we're looking at raising, kind of building up the track embankment and raising the track up. It takes a long linear distance to be able to raise the track profile up, just due to freight traffic and some of the limitations of what grades they can achieve. So we're not talking, a huge lift. It could be up to a couple to 5 feet maximum we're talking about. But in many areas, we have wave overtopping over the tracks, and that's a concern for overall stability of the track. So even raising the track profile a couple of feet would make a big difference.
So for those that have not asked a question or provided a comment, we're going to get to you first, and then if there's time, we'll circle back around to those that have already. Sir, are you ready?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. My name is John Dologowski. I'm a San Clemente resident and former member of the Coastal Advisory Committee. I think it would be a great idea if OCTA and the City of San Clemente could enter discussions into starting a long-term commitment to maintaining a sand buffer at the areas where the ocean is already up against the riprap. The riprap is effective in pertaining the tracks, but it's also well known that when the ocean breaks close to the riprap, it ricochets off the rock, it stirs up the sand, resulting in increased erosion, and the boulders are undermined and they shift position. As many people have mentioned tonight. So if some sort of agreement were agreed to, I mean, you yourselves have mentioned that you have a budget and plans for maintaining the tracks, and it's well known. I'm sure there's various things that you plan on a yearly basis or a 10-year basis, and if you could include the sand replenishment in there, truly the sand is protecting the riprap, which is protecting the tracks, and so the sand replenishment is a huge cost for a small city of this size, and the city, I think, has done a good job pulling in outside sources to contribute towards periodic replenishments, but the more agencies that could be brought into it, the better, and the more certainty there could be that there would be sufficient sand to protect the tracks and our beaches at the same time.
Thank you very much for your comment. Appreciate it.
Okay. So we'll go over here and then we'll come back.
Hi, I'm Tony Nelson with Capo Cares. I have 3 questions. The first one is, you referred to something about pumping action, and I'm not sure what exactly you're referring to. It doesn't sound like a technical term, but I think you might be referring to the vibration of the trains causing liquefaction underneath. You're talking about water in the rail bed itself, and that makes us very nervous for those of us who live on the bluff above. There's a whole Palisades section in my community. And we feel your trains going by every night. 100 feet up, when it's quiet and you're laying in bed, you can feel your bed moving from the vibration. So I know vibration exists. So I'm wondering if you have looked at the issue of what happens when we have these huge storms and our bluffs have turned basically to jello, and then you start shaking these huge, heavy trains along it. That's dangerous. And it almost feels like you are trying to deal with the problem of your own making, that you are vibrating along, causing landslides potentially, and then trying to fix them after the fact. So that's question 1. Question 2 is, you keep talking about 10 to 30 years. And if I, look at this from 30,000 feet and look at the big picture, I'm thinking, man, you were here for 130 years, and in the last 5, everything fell apart. And what makes you think, this gentleman in the middle said that we are one storm away from annihilation of the railroad. What makes you think that all of these walls and all of this riprap is magically going to make the railroad be sustainable for 10 to 30 years? Do you have a study on that? Have you done the engineering to figure that out? Because it doesn't seem plausible. And it really doesn't seem plausible when I think about the fact that this is 351 miles of continuous track. And what's going on in Del Mar, where we have trains up on a bluff 30 feet from an edge, and we've already had landslides there. It just doesn't seem like it makes sense. These are things that make people laugh at California. They say, do you really think you're going to hold back the ocean? Do you really think you're going to keep the bluffs from sliding? Do you really think we're not going to have storms and that it's not going to continue? It seems kind of ludicrous. So my third question is, and I'll give it back, I promise, is can you do a real, or can we have an independent person, actually an independent firm, not related to any agencies, work on a cost-benefit analysis on this thing? A real independent one. I think that's what the public needs. Because, you know, if I was in business, this is what we did whenever we're addressing a big problem. We look at the costs and we look at the benefits. We have huge environmental costs here. You're ruining our beaches. We're losing public access. My little grandson can't walk over all that riprap without hurting himself. He can't get to the beach. This is a huge loss to our community, a huge economic loss. The costs are enormous. Then we add the costs of all the riprap, all the walls, all the mitigation you're trying to do. And then what are the real benefits? You know, you keep saying it is the second busiest railroad in the nation. I really dispute that. I have the data from your own agency on this.
Ms. Nelson, thank you for the questions that you asked, and thank you for your comments.
Okay.
I think we want to talk about the pumping action, and then the question about what's our analysis on the 10 to 30 year sort of solutions. And I think the last question was with respect to having somebody independent. I think that last one isn't really a question, it's more of a comment. So, right, but we don't really have an answer to that question, right? So we'll take it down and we'll include it in the comments for sure.
Yeah, so the first question about the pumping action. So on the railroad, that's a pretty frequent term. And all it's referring to is the fines that are in the track bed, in the ballast material, and when there's standing water in there, and when the trains go onto the tracks, the kind of action that's causing with the fines. And so we like to get rid of the water and let it drain properly from the track bed. So that's what it's referring to. It's referring to that action, and that is is part of a regular track maintenance, where track maintenance crews go across and they look for these kind of spots, along the railroad, and the maintenance crews will look at ways to be able to extract those fines and to allow that water to drain.
Are you saying fines like?
No, fines like the material. We're referring to the type of material that's being maybe eroded onto the track bed.
I see, thank you. And then we had a second question about the idea of looking at solutions that are for 10 to 30 years. What is our confidence that this will address the issue for the next 10 to 30 years? How's that incorporated into our analysis?
Yeah, so I think depending on which alternative you look, because there's a lot on this menu. So for example, if you are looking at a structural solution, those structural solutions are usually designed to certain standards that have a certain lifespan. For example, if it's like a beachside solution that involves sand, then similar to the way that I addressed the question about, sand usually requires a certain level of maintenance and frequency of sand replenishment. So that will be on a different kind of, life cycle or cycle of replenishment as well. So there is no 1 year for every single one of these. But in combination, every time that we're going to look at each one of these, it will be to try and get us to that ultimate 30-year horizon.
Thank you, George. And we're going to pause for a second. I want to let y'all know that we've got about 10 minutes left. So if you haven't had a chance to make a comment or ask a question, feel free to raise your hand. Everybody else who has additional questions, please consider writing them down, on the comment cards, one of the comment sheets on the back. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks,
Who's next?
Chris. Okay, we're going to go over here. Oh, you're good. Okay.
This gentleman up there. Thank you. Mark Idmeyer, San Clemente City Council. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate it. At the same time, when I hear that it's going to be about 18 months before we're looking at the end of the study, before we even start considering action, I get concerned because you've mentioned that we could have another big storm, and that may be 6 months away. And we know that sand works. We know that sand retention works. We know that those solutions are great solutions. And I'm just wondering, why aren't we speeding up that timeline for the solutions that we know are feasible?
Thank you for that question, and it's a good question. So this study, basically we have to follow a standard process, right? And that standard process includes an alternative sort of analysis, which is exactly what we aim to do. We're looking at all of the different strategies that we can implement that would be applicable, that would be appropriate, and evaluating them based off of that criteria. And so does that kind of answer your question?
I mean, it just seems 18 months before the study is done, before we can even start to take action.
It seems just very long.
So let me add a little context to that as well. If you recall, and I think you've been part of this process for some time right now. At the start of this study, there was an initial assessment. And the initial assessment included evaluating the entire 7-mile corridor and trying to determine, are there areas that need immediate attention? And there were 4 areas that were identified. These are in addition to the 3 areas that we had already dealt with emergencies on and that impacted service, and we addressed those. These 4 areas, those are the areas we're looking at now and working to address quickly. The study is focused on the full corridor and the potential issues, right? And we've divided them into 7 sections, right? So those 7 sections are representative of the entire 7-mile stretch. And that color coding does reference, which section is what and what the potential solutions are. So those areas that we're talking about right now, as part of the study, there isn't that immediate need, right? That immediate need was identified and is being addressed currently.
Through the riprap?
Through riprap and sand nourishment, right? If you recall, we've got 4 emergency areas, right? 3 seaside, 1 bluff side. The bluff side, there is a catchment wall that is planned to be built that's going to reincorporate the beach trail. On the beach side, we have areas 1 and 2, and those currently had riprap repair and then placement of additional riprap to really clean that area up and really reinforce the tracks. And sand nourishment is on tap as part of that, as part of the solution to areas 1 and 2. In addition, we have area 4 that we're looking at that includes looking at a shoreline structure and looking at sand nourishment as well. And that information is definitely available as part of, we've got it on our website at octanet.net/rail emergency. So you can take a look at the details there. But in general, that's what we're talking about, right? The difference between the two. So we've already identified the urgent need and we're addressing that.
Thank you, Chris. We're going to come over here.
Thank you. Wendy Morris, resident of San Clemente. I have a few comments about your concepts. The first one I want to talk about is the rail concepts. I want to know why you do not include the cause of much of the vibration is by the fast, heavy freight trains. Maybe they could go slower, make a big difference. And another thing I've noticed, I live close to the tracks, is the maintenance on the wheels on these fast, heavy freight trains is awful. And there's flat spots, and they jiggle that much more when that part of the train comes through. So that's something that should be done in your rail concepts. Okay, your bluff side, your groundwater instability. I can understand, yes, we need to get rid of some of that water. Well, Why are we waiting until it gets all the way down to the tracks? If you drive on the 405, on the 5 freeway, there's places there you can see the groundwater coming out of the land on the side of the freeway. So why can't we move some of that groundwater, use it for landscaping on different areas, many other ways to use it, but get it before it gets down to the tracks? You know, it seems to me we could drill a few wells, just like they're doing in Palos Verdes with all their landslides. Well, maybe we need to do that up by the freeway to get rid of that groundwater. Okay, now I'm back to the beachside concepts. Okay, well, placement of sand is the most important thing, and it needs to be done very, very soon. And if you have a revetment, you don't put the sand in front of it, we won't have a usable beach, and nor will waves be there for kids to enjoy and surfers to enjoy and just beachgoers to enjoy. So it's really important that you have sand first before any type of revetment. Okay, overall, it seems like you've only been looking at the protection of the railroad and not the beach. And people here were all interested in the beach. And one last comment is, why don't we hear from the freight companies, the freight trains? Why aren't they involved in this? It seems to me that they're part of the real problem we're having. So why aren't they contributing to the funds here? Why aren't they bringing in sand on their tracks? You know, it just seems to me that that'd be the fastest way to get sand. Go up to a dam, have some of the sand taken out, put onto the train tracks, haul it down to the beach, and dump them out on the sand. It just seems like such a natural thing, such an easy way to take care of it. And then the freight trains would be involved. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate those comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left. Who has not asked a question yet? Over here. Go ahead, sir.
I have one question/comment. So I'm sorry, Save Our Beaches. I live here. Focusing on the beachside approaches. I'm trying to understand, like, what do we take away from this? Because it's like a list of things that we could do that we kind of knew already, are those that pay attention to it. So I'm just, if my son asks me, what did we learn today, Dad? What do I tell him based on what you've done so far? And maybe it's too early in the process, but I'm just trying to understand, like, what do we know now that we didn't know at the beginning of this? Because with that list of things, like, I kind of already knew that, and probably most people here that pay attention do. So just trying to understand, like, what are the implications that you have at this point?
Sure. Do you want to take that one, Rebecca? I can start, though, with what you're seeing here are, and I would refer you to that matrix, right? You have different typical sections, and you have different areas, different sort of beachside, bluffside, and rail solutions. So it gives you a sense of, by area, what the potential solutions are that are being analyzed. And what we're looking for is your feedback on those potential solutions. We're going to take that back along with other feedback, refine the concepts, right? And then come back and present them again, right? And get additional feedback there.
The answer is going to be sand. We want sand.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, thank you for your comment there.
Okay.
Do you have anything to add?
I mean, just to kind of piggyback, and I know we're getting to the end here, but I mean, it really does. I think the answer, and I hear everybody loud and clear that sand is definitely an important component, and that's why we're including it in this study. However, we are trying to just make sure that we do our due diligence, right? We know that sand is an important component. However, we've also discussed the complexity and the challenges that the ocean, brings into this, as well as far as moving sand. We can place sand there, but how long does it take until it's gone, and then that protection is no longer there? And so it's a very complicated question to answer, and we are learning through this process that it's much more complicated than we originally thought, and it's going to take a combination of these different concepts to protect the railroad in place to get us to that longer term sort of horizon. and it takes time, and we don't want to jump the gun, so to speak, and assume that we have answers before we fully vet them.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay,
So
right over
I've
here.
got to say,
Go ahead, Chris.
yeah, I'm gonna cut it off at 6:30. What I would like for y'all is, if you have additional comments, please take one of our comment sheets or email us. I'm gonna push to the last slide here. Actually, I do want to talk about the next steps really quickly. I did discuss this. I went over this, right? But what we'll do is continue refining the alternatives, right, into the end of this year and early next year. Once we have some refined concepts, we will come back to the public, right, and get input on those. And then we expect to have a draft feasibility study report. That's going to come out in 2026. And we'll get additional feedback at that point in time. And then we will have a last release of the feasibility report in 2026. It'll be going to our board.
Chris, real quick, we do have a representative from the county, and she wanted to give a quick update for the public just on where they are with sand.
Sure.
Is that okay?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Abby and I'm with Vice Chair Katrina Foley's office. And really quick, we really appreciate you all coming out, and we agree with you all that sand is our priority as well. And we appreciate all the work that OCTA is doing to, save our rail line, but we also wanted to update you on sand from the Prado Dam that we're working on getting. It just passed their planning commission. We're working with OC Water District, our OC Public Works teams, to kind of streamline the process and cut some of that red bureaucratic tape to get this process going and hopefully get 100,000 cubic yards of sand coming this fall. We just wanted to give an update because we know how important it is to all of you, to all of me. I also live down here in South County, so I want our beaches restored as well. But we're so grateful for your advocacy, and also grateful once again for all of your work to save our beaches, save our rails, and our coastal economy. But yeah, if you have any questions about what we can do, or if you have comments, we'd love to hear them as well, and I'll stick around after the meeting.
Thank you very, very much. And I would reiterate, thank you all for spending some time with us this evening. Again, we do have those comment cards in the back. They're actually 8.5 by 11 sheets. Feel free to send us an email. You can send me an email or send an email to Rebecca. Actually, the better email address so that everybody gets it is the CRRS@octa.net. That's our project email. That's you can certainly CC Rebecca and me on that, but please send it to the project email. Thank you again. Appreciate it.